In this video, I'm going to show you how to determine a fabric's stretch factor by using this thing I like to call a stretch gauge, which you'll get when you watch this video. It's just a PDF that you can print out, and it has sort of the stretch gauge on the right side, and then it has some, further details about the different types of knit fabrics and what classification they are in terms of their stretch factor. So as you can see here, we start off with stable knits that have a 0 to 25% stretch factor, which is actually very little stretch. And you actually treat it more like a woven fabric, and it still needs garment ease. So you actually do no pattern reductions to that. Then we have our moderate knit fabrics, and these are 26% to 50% stretch factor, which are more stretch than stable, but examples being your basic t-shirt knits, interlocks, and jerseys, and you're going to need to do a 2% pattern reduction to that. And how to do a pattern reduction, I'll get into a little bit later on in the video. Then we go on to our stretchy knits, which is 51% to 75% stretch factor. And these are examples being velour, stretch terry, and some t-shirt knits that are a little bit more stretchy than your first moderate knit ones. And then we have our super stretch knits, and these are very stretchy fabrics that go from 76% to 100% stretch factor. And these, are your fabrics that you see in swimwear, athletic wear. These are your spandex fabrics. So now that we know, our basic knit classifications, we are actually going to go through how to specifically determine a fabric's, certain stretch factor. So I'm going to put this to the side here, and I have just cut out my stretch gauge right here from the PDF. And just a quick note, you want to print out this document actual size. You don't want to scale it when printing it out, because there are specific measurements and certain percentage guides that you want to keep on scale. So I just cut it out and just glued it to a little bit more stable paper, like cardstock. So you want to do that so you can travel with it, take it to the fabric store, perform little stretch tests in the fabric store so you know that you're getting the right fabric for your pattern. So put that aside, and I have some stretch fabrics to my right here. So I have some stretch fabric here. I know it's stretchy because I can, stretch it in my hands, but we need to now determine the specific stretch factor percentage. So I'm just going to lay it out here, and you want to determine the fabric's stretch factor in both directional ways. This is the selvage edge right here, which is the sort of rough edge of the fabric. You'll see, this cut edge that you get from the fabric store. This is not the selvage, this is the selvage here. So we want to find our lengthwise stretch factor by, determining it parallel to, the selvage. And then we want to determine our crosswise grain, stretch factor by actually taking our fabric and doing it perpendicular to our selvage edge. So first I'll do my crosswise grain line. So as you can see, I just picked it up, and my selvage is on my left here. And you always want to perform this stretch test to find out the stretch factor on the fold of a fabric. So I've just folded my fabric like so, and I have a sewing gauge right here, and I've marked it to 5 inches. So I'm going to place it somewhere in the middle of my fabric, and I'm going to place 2 pins, one at the 0-inch mark, and then one at the 5-inch mark. So about right there. And you want, a little bit of the pin to sort of stick up above the fold, and you want to make sure your pins are nice and straight. So you don't want them sort of on an angle, because it can sort of warp your measurement. So now I have my stretch gauge in front of me, which is again this piece of paper right here, and I have my fabric, and I'm going to place one pin at the 0-inch mark on my stretch gauge, and then the other pin is going to be at my 5-inch mark right here. So with my hands on either side of the pin, I'm going to, hold my finger firmly on this pin and stretch my hand so this pin goes as far as it can without, really warping the stretch in the fabric. So just tug it until it doesn't want to stretch anymore and it's starting to bounce back. So I'm stretching it, and it's about halfway between 40 and 50. So I have a stretch factor of 45%. So what that means is I can refer back to this document right here that you'll get. So 45 falls in the category of a moderate knit. So it's a moderate knit percentage. So that's where you can sort of determine, you know, where that is on this scale and what pattern reductions that you need to do. And so I have noted down that my crosswise grain is 45%. Now I'm going to take out my pins. You can either write that down or just remember it in your head. So you need to determine both of the grain lines. So now I'm going to do the lengthwise grain. And again, this is parallel to the selvage. So I'm going to lay my fabric back out, and I'm going to fold it so the fold is parallel to the selvage, again, which is this edge right here. And I'm going to do the same thing where I take my sewing gauge somewhere in the middle of the fabric. You don't want to do it too close to the edge because it, you know, the edge can sort of warp the stretch a little bit. So I'm going to put one pin right here, lay my sewing gauge, and I'm going to put another pin at my 5-inch mark, just like we did for our crosswise grain. So I'm going to lay this down here, place this on here, and I'm going to stretch it. And this one only stretches to 40%. So I can see that my crosswise grain has a little bit more stretch. And when we determine what grain line has the more stretch in it, we always want to lay our pattern pieces with the direction of greatest stretch going across our body, because we don't need stretch lengthwise, we need it more crosswise to go across our body bulges. And that's why knit fabrics, you know, fit so well, because they just simply stretch over our body. And so we need that, you know, greater stretch across our body. So that's just how you can quickly determine the fabric's stretch factor. And just a little, you know, note right here is that once you stretch it to the greatest amount it can be stretched, you can simply release your hand and you can see where the pin bounces back. Now this fabric has pretty good recovery, and to determine the fabric's recovery is where the pin falls back after you stretch it to its greatest stretch. So as you can see, it's not, you know, bouncing back to its original position, but, you know, anything less than 10, it has good recovery. If you get, you know, a fabric that you stretch and it, you know, bounces back to only 20, that fabric does not have good recovery, and you don't want to use it, you know, for tight fitting clothing, because then it's going to bag, you know, when you're wearing the garment. So, you know, for loose t-shirts, you know, a fabric that has, you know, not good recovery is totally fine.